15. Destiny. Shoreen's wings fluttered in silence while she funneled golden light to form a glowing halo around my body. Since Lucius had taken on Liatra as an architect's apprentice, and the summoned minion had to stay within range of her master, I sat on the plateau just outside the small building while she refilled my spirit pool. Glacial freeze turned out to be a fine work of the goddess's own making. Unable to restrain myself when the elves came to our aid and Priya fell in battle then vanished, I'd ordered my younger sister to stay with Pulo, then burst into the open. The elves would have soon had things in hand, but I itched to draw blood and utilize the new ability. So I'd popped the lid on the trap door, then sprinted to the center of the plateau, where the heaviest violence had ensued. Focusing on the ability in my interface triggered it. Then a wave of icy energy blasted from my glowing boots to spread ice in all directions. Our enemies soon found their feet encumbered under a solid sheet of ice. Not one resisted the ability. Then our melee combatants backed away, and the elven archers made short work of the king's forces. But I soon found that this gift would not come so easily as I'd hoped. The one constant in my work with Roshan before she'd left us to become the priestess at the temple in Warrington was my inability to quiet my mind. Although she insisted I practice whenever she visited the Foundation, I never did so when she was away. So when I rose that morning to kneel on the stones atop the cave where Priya and I once rolled out our furs to sleep under the stars, I could not silence my thoughts. No matter how I struggled to erase the images of wonderful violence undertaken in the goddess's name, I could not draw the energy to refill my spirit pool. When Giles later sensed my frustration, he called upon the lone member of our foundation capable of assisting, Liatra, and by proxy, her minion Shoreen. But Giles wouldn't depart without a general reminder that only practice would bring mastery over what he called the eldest of the elven arts. Although I collaborated with Pulo to fill Gemini's role in his absence, military and defense considerations were Giles's domain. So when he told me to practice each day so I'd be prepared to use my ability, I obeyed. But meditation sucked. Trying to quiet one's mind when a number of people about whom you cared most had either been taken or vanished proved impossible. The bane of my existence. Although our elven master and commander wore not his emotions on his sleeve, I was certain he shared my discontent. After all, he represented his ancient race of people in the quest to aid the Shenhua to prevail over the forces of evil lurking in Rubal. He invested all his time toward that end. But moments before Shoreen began to channel the light and replenish my spirit pool, the elven wonder and prince announced he would be taking over command of the forces at Warrington Academy, despite the absence of the Shenhua and the Boros matron. My responsibilities would grow, but Amelia Horn had a mind for tactics, and she would prove an apt partner in the enterprise. When my spirit pool crossed the 70% mark, the sound of my sister's voice echoed from down in the valley. Despite Shoreen's ability to refill my resources, a certain modicum of focus was still required, and the distraction of Machini's words brought our progress to a halt.
"She's gone. She disappeared."
I rose with a frustrated huff.
"What are you going on about, Shinny?"
She hustled over, dipped her chin in reverence for only the briefest moment, then sputtered a chain of words, which required my intent focus to decipher.
"We were down in the valley at the footbridge near the fishery. I raised a fine salmon and offered it to her, but when I held it high so she would raise onto her back legs to snatch it, she vanished."
I made no effort to hide my sigh. "Are you speaking of the snow lioness Alpha? Is it Sheena who's missing?" My sister's chin bobbed. I rubbed my temples. My sister's tendency toward excitable outbursts since Gemini brought her to the Foundation contrasted any memories I'd had of her growing up. She'd always been so level, so restrained, but leaving most of the male members of our pride behind when we'd come changed everything, and Machini found a purpose that suited her. Now if only she'd control it. I ceased the massaging of my temples and dropped my hand from my forehead. "This is good news, Machini. Take a moment. Calm down. Quiet your mind." The irony of that last bit was not lost on me. "There, that's better. Now, tell me why Sheena might have vanished." A credit to her quick wit, the response came immediately, but with no less enthusiasm.
Master Gemini must have summoned her, just like Click yesterday. It means he battles to free himself from his captors.
You could be right. It's possible he was captured again if he did escape. And if he remained captive, maybe he's making his second attempt. Eventually he will succeed or he will fall trying. Then he will return to us. This time, Machini shook her head. Then she paused, set her gaze upon me as if to consider before she spoke, then twisted her head with more conviction.
Sister, if Mistress Priya spawned wherever Gemini was, it follows that Gemini too will spawn there if he falls.
When her words registered, I snapped my fingers. I'd forgotten that. Sometimes I didn't give my sister enough credit. Perhaps she held further insight. And what other conclusions do you draw? She took a moment to consider the question. Her hands shifted to her hips. Then her hips tilted in the opposite direction as she gazed toward the puffy clouds over the high, rocky cliffs in the western sky. Her cheeks ticked.
Oh, if he found a place to bind, he likely escaped before. We haven't received notice that Sharni has fallen, and since he is only level 19, it follows they are probably safe.
Very good, Machini.
Thank you. Now, when will we march west and wreak havoc on the bastard king who took them from us?
She thrust a finger into the air directed toward the clouds. One boot tapped with expectation. I'm afraid those decisions are out of my control. Machini took a step forward, cupped my shoulder with one hand, then squeezed.
Oh, sister, obedient to a fault, aren't you?
I made no effort to hide my scowl. What on Enora do you mean? She gripped the other shoulder and gave both a firm tug.
Sister, Giles has taken his leave of the Foundation.
She dropped one hand long enough to scratch the dimple in her chin with a finger.
I wonder who is left in charge of military decisions in his absence.
Now, Machini. I slapped the remaining hand away from my shoulder. While I embrace the spirit of your thinking, the meaning beneath worries me. Do you suggest I act in contradiction to Gemini's and Giles's wishes?
Did they specifically state their wishes?
She interlocked her fingers, drew her shoulders in, then tilted her head to one side. Well, no, I don't suppose they did.
Then there are no commands by which you are restricted. Perhaps Amelia Horn could provide us some sound advice.
You know good and well Amelia would rush west. She's been out of sorts from the moment Gemini was dragged through that portal. She was silent in our party chats throughout the whole ordeal. Then Priya fell and she won't stop picking at her fingers. Don't try to manipulate me. Her hand returned to her hips, but this time she stood with her spine straight. Her tail shot up behind her.
Then you must decide using logic, Destiny. What is this Foundation without Gemini, Priya, and Giles?
Time for another teaching moment. And if we trotted west like ill-prepared fools lacking the resources to pose any threat, who would be in charge of defending the Foundation when more invaders arrived? Her hands dropped to her side, then her shoulders slumped.
I hadn't considered that.
And that one will cost you 10 laps around the borough. Now go.
You should still consult with Amelia.
She lit off obediently. In a perfect display of timing, the door to the architect's cabin swung open, and Liatra emerged. The hem of her fine robe swept along the tips of the short grass when she approached. She addressed me in the usual sing-song greeting voice used when initiating a conversation.
Hello. I received notification that you stopped before your spirit pool was filled up. Is something amiss?
I shook my head. Not exactly amiss, but my sister just said something that has set my mind ill at ease.
Oh?
Her face scrunched up in concern.
Would you like to share the words that so disturbed you?
I am less concerned about the words she used than my considering the proposal they formed.
And how long do you think the riddle will go on before you finally share your meaning?
I would have chuckled if not for the near treasonous thoughts cycling through my mind. At the risk of frustrating you further, let me answer your question with a question. If I wanted to form a party to ride west and recover the Shenhua and Jaren's mother, would you follow?
In the absence of the master, I must give you the answer I would give him, but have no doubt I weigh it equally.
And your answer is?
Where thee goes, I go. But if you'll give me leave to say it, and if you'll promise not to be upset,
I flicked 2 fingers in a come-hither gesture. Out with it.
You should speak to Amelia.
Why does everyone think I need Amelia's leave to make this decision? Liatra displayed a rare frown. More of it twitch at the corners of her mouth, because the woman never really grimaced.
I wasn't suggesting you need her leave. It's just that she is a great niece to the Queen. Samanthia loves Gemini. She's bound to him. He's made her immortal. They conspire together in private with regularity.
I waved both hands. I get it. My head lolled forward. Apologies, I misunderstood. I will speak with Amelia immediately. Our heads whipped around so we faced northwest when a scream echoed, then reverberated in the valley. A figure in the distance plunged through space from the high cliffs above, careening toward the ground. I recognized her immediately, and Liatra confirmed my suspicion of the careener's identity.
Okay, so maybe just contact the Queen directly. It seems Amelia has taken matters into her own hands. 16. Amelia. Although I'd made the request of my queen an hour after Gemini stepped through the portal, communications always crept through a web of gatekeepers to reach her. To delay me further, recent events kept her occupied. While Gemini's kidnapping demanded every ounce of my attention, the attack on Warrington signaled the arrival of a civil war. Then there were the shrouded meetings. Although I'd been assigned to and had willfully given over my life to protecting the Shenhua, he'd evaded my rapt attention to slip through a portal to New Nin on these occasions. His stealthy escapes from my watchful eye proved a humbling experience to say the least. Although he made no secret of them, the details remained between the two, tight-lipped as he called them. So, who knew how the plans they made in secret affected the timeliness of the Queen's response? All I had was suspicions and the daunting weight of impatience. My protectee, gone. The matron of the Foundation, gone. And I twiddled my thumbs. Paced. My only relief came when the Elven 2nd Assassins Brigade, the battalion I thought I'd serve until Gemini appeared, as coincidence would have it, burst through the portal and we laid waste to the King's remaining men. But the cleanup duty after Dicini froze all of them in place proved unsatisfying. If any word described the Queen, it was methodical. Perhaps she considered my request at length, whether I saw it as simple or not. With a wealth of experience stacked over 2 millennia, the Queen rarely required prolonged intervals for consideration. Advisors of war and commerce, not to mention an advisory council for matters pertaining to the city's vital functions, visited her regularly. A network of spies and a new army of envoys stretched halfway across the continent to keep her apprised of politics outside of New Nin. Samanthia might have been the best-informed being in the East, and I was but one tiny sprocket in a complex machine. But the Regent's attention to all matters involving the Shenhua always came home to roost, and I counted myself lucky she responded directly instead of passing the answer down through the keepers. Private chat. Samanthia. Private. Dear niece, I wish I'd thought of it myself. The mission you recommend is approved under the following conditions. 1. Make no one aware of it. 2. Set aside any inhibitions and adopt the Assassins Brigade's standards and guidelines until Gemini is returned to the Foundation. Understand, however, that I will be undertaking other operations that are certain to delay your return. This is by design, and it does my heart good to know you will reunite with Gemini first. Any who would interfere with your mission must be terminated with prejudice. 3. Use your alchemy proficiency to make the deadliest poison possible in the Foundation's lab, and, if you are captured, consume it immediately. My contacts in Brusaria assure me you do not want to fall into the grasp of the King's new advisor, and I would just as soon you endure resurrection sickness and start again, if it comes to that. In addition, your class selection is approved pending the Shenhua's acceptance. A fine choice. Although it might be tempting to fill your magic bag with poisons to support the new specialty, I suggest you wait until you've arrived. Since Gemini doesn't allow you to contribute to the Foundation's coffers, you should have plenty to pay potential informants for intelligence, and alchemists for potions and poisons once you're in Brusaria. My hands adopted an uncharacteristic tremble of excitement. Finally, I'd adopt a specialty class. When first I'd met the Shenhua, I hadn't reached level 30. For the prior 3 years, I'd trained to become a member of the ESAB, But Gemini's arrival changed everything. So when the Queen approved my request to be his protector, I'd been taken aback. Elves born hundreds of years before, who certainly outranked me, were passed over that I might serve in my role as protector. Never in my life would I dare to ask why. Then I'd failed, and, although I detected no disappointment in my regent's language, just the opposite really, the image of Gemini walking through that portal while I stood helplessly by wouldn't flee my brain. The easy way his captor disabled me replayed in my mind again and again. Meditation failed me. Sleep evaded. I continued scanning the Queen's communication. Reams of text filled the pane. Never before had my aunt spoken such length in my chat dialogue. Finally, I entrust you with the information I haven't shared with my advisors nor members of the Fowler Foundation. After the King's letter to Gemini arrived, our deliberations began in earnest. In retrospect, I wish I'd added Gemini to an elven clan chat, but we must keep our eyes forward. Below is a summary of the plan. Until we've acted, you will keep this information confidential. All restrictions on your activities are lifted. While in Brusaria, you are free to take any actions that further our agenda. If the citizens are enlightened to the capabilities of elven kind, all the better. Just be certain innocents are not harmed, or the plan will be for naught. Once I'd absorbed the details, I sent a 3-word reply, then closed out the chat. I sheathed, then pressed my daggers down until they clicked into place. My bowstring snapped across my chest. I cinched my belt tight, then buckled it. After a cleansing breath, I stepped to the edge of the rise, looking down onto the Fowler Foundation, then swallowed the moment of apprehensive vertigo before closing my eyes, then stepping off the ledge and into space. 17. Priya. A torch burned at the end of a narrow tunnel, its orange flickering painting its sheen on walls formed of slimy brick. Despite the murky surroundings, a warmth spread through her bones. This was definitely the place. The scent from her dreams on the dank air was as familiar as the sound of her own voice.
Like coming home.
The voice came in a grumble, but echoed as if the speaker screamed. Delphine's ears twitched, and although the shadow's aura coursing through her didn't recede, a nausea crept into her belly, then churned like scaly beasts slithered inside. The figure materialized from a side passage, then stepped in front of the torch, so its shadow darkened his features. Despite the creeping sense she'd lose every morsel of food she'd digested, the warmth was the embrace of love. Still, she glanced down to find massive dots of goose flesh creeping up her arms, even covering the backs of her hands. By the time her head came up again, she hadn't glanced away for more than a second, but the figure stood close enough they almost touched, and radiant eyes glared down upon her.
They call you Magister, but when you serve me, when you serve at the call of my master, they call you Mistress.
His irises flashed yellow. The nauseating sensation crept through her chest, over her shoulders, and down her arms until she could feel it struggle to escape through her fingertips and pour darkness into the world. Delphine parted her lips to speak, to reject his offer in the name of the matron, but the sound from her throat came as little more than a choked gasp.
The last of your resistance fades. Although low in level, I am empowered by the black. Underlord Kane satiates my need for life energy regularly, and you cannot know an existence such as mine until you are ready to sacrifice your own. But I cannot feed of your flesh without your leave.
Never shall you feed on me, vampire.
But you shall serve.
The vicious creature of the night leaned still closer so his hot breath burned her eyes.
You will bring unto me the Mana-born. You will accept me and become my sister under our master.
Her words escaped her absent intent and sounded like someone else had spoken them. I will. Warsager Jakan grinned so wide the sides of his gums along his teeth were like tunnels leading to the dark depths of his soul.
4 fangs from the top row slotted with matching ones below. The creep of nausea that was his existence inside her belly and pushing through the rest of her body was a curse on the light. And Delphine knew she was home. My eyes fluttered open when my chest gave a violent hitch. Certain the nausea would erupt from my gut, I pressed my hands to my knees, then doubled over. But no, it was a dream. Yet I stood. How did one dream upright? It was then I noticed I peered over the edge of a roof 2 stories up, waving my arms frantically, teetering, then falling onto my backside. I sighed with relief as my gaze turned to a cloudy, cold sky. It was me. It was her. Despite Jara's relentless instruction over years, too many to count, darkness found its way in, then consumed me. Now I knew to what depths. The foul undead hypnotized me, charmed me. How many poor souls did I bring? How many did I curse into oblivion? Any relief derived from my role in vanquishing Underlord came. Any hope of retribution via the penitence paid to the goddess erased. No wonder she despised me so. The presence reasserted itself across the years as I gazed out over the city from a perch to which I had no memory of climbing. How long had I been unconscious? Had not the denizens of the city noticed me? My hands grazed my blouse. I yanked them away and glared down. My heartbeat punched my breast. A silken top with overlapping waves of fabric covered my chest. Wide cuffs dangling from my wrists funneled into slim-fitting sleeves before joining stacked cloth, cascading over my shoulders and down my back. Matching pants flared around my ankles. Every inch of my body was covered in black. Soft pressure circling from my temples to the back of my head called my fingertips to investigate. I slipped off the hat, then peered inside. The inner fabric was of the same silk, but the outer trim wore a layer of fur. No, a fine thin felt. A notification flashed in my interface. A new memory has surfaced. You have reached level 43. +2 to Constitution. +2 to Intelligence. You have 5 bonus attribute points to spend. You have remembered a spell. Blink 3. Wink your eyes and focus your mana to advance 40 yards in the blink of an eye. Type. Spell. Cost. NA. Damage. NA. Cooldown. 3 seconds. How naive had I been to think these memories of my past would abate once the Dark Underlord had fallen. And where in Holcrum's underworld did I steal these clothes? Best not to dwell on it while you sit on a rooftop. My heart lurched. The absences from my own life confused me. I squeezed my eyes closed in search of images, any encounters I'd had while... The crack, the strange loss of time consumed me. But memories evaded me. My last recollection, standing outside a smithy when... Gemini! He'd been nearby. I touched him across the ether. Then the world tilted and... nothing. I rose, then dusted off my backside, twisting at an unnatural angle, then tugging where the pants covered my backside to ensure I'd done a sufficient job. A glance over the edge revealed horse-drawn carts and too much foot traffic for my comfort, so I crossed to the opposite. A lone woman in tattered coverings on a narrow back street paced with her back facing my direction, so I levitated down, then strolled in search of my companion. My stomach grumbled, but it wasn't like I'd thought to carry any sustenance into battle. Although it was nice to live where I could stroll to my kitchen and whip up a quick meal or raid the leftovers from the food I prepared for our people, one thing I truly loved about the burrow, I made a mental note to always keep a snack at hand. After all, causing trouble was a cumbersome business, and one never knew what challenges awaited. An image of Jarin feeding at my breast the day before left it pulsing with the desire to empty itself. I considered finding a dark corner to give it a good squeeze for relief, but the second location on my target list was nearby, and I could rent a room there to do the job in private. Thunder rumbled overhead. Then I peered skyward down the street to find thick purple clouds stacked high. It wasn't cold enough for snow, but close. Best get on with it. But when I turned, I spied a familiar figure's likeness hand-drawn on a small sheet pinned crooked on a post. I grinned as I scanned the thick curls and hardy nose. The artist got the chin all wrong, though. Hard to be subtle sometimes, isn't it, love? I cackled before I knew I would, then forced some small measure of composure. I whispered, "Mind your mouth, fool." I folded the paper on all sides, tore away the reward information printed at the bottom, then shoved the remnants into the outer pocket on my bag, adjacent the one with the dagger. Jem would have called the place a dump. A broken table sat in one corner, and when I spied several men with dirty clothes and long beards, I envisioned bar fights. The images warmed me. It was one thing to send a message, but another entirely to draw unneeded attention by murdering a room full of innocents. A woman with green hair and a silver nose ring greeted me before I could enter the tavern area.
"Aye, miss. Can I help you?"
I forced a congenial tone. "Why, yes, thank you." I unfolded the poster with meticulous care, then passed it over. "Have you seen this man?" Greenie presented a perfect smile when she snatched the picture, but her features tightened then wrinkled when she scanned it. She thrust it back, then looked me up and down.
"You with the king's forces?"
Unsure how to respond, I opted for a headshake in hopes that the low areas of the city would spurn authority. Poorer areas usually bucked authority. "I'm a friend of his." I leaned toward her, "and I promise healthy rewards to those who aid me in my quest to recover him." The wrinkles faded.
"Really? What kind of reward?"
I shot her a practiced, wry grin. "Why, the kind you can spend, of course. The amount depends on both the quality of and how much information you can provide." She took 2 steps back, tapped the toe of her ratty shoe against the broken table propped against the wall, then gave a curt nod.
"Was him did this? How's that for information?"
"This is his doing?"
"Aye, it is indeed. Why, he strolled in here with that goblin."
Yo, just a quick reminder. Make sure to click like and subscribe. If you enjoyed these chapters, make sure to leave a comment below. Thanks.